You can access right now everything you need to achieve anything that you can imagine. Anything. You can either adapt to the changes that are coming at you from your environment, or you can make the change in yourself and to your environment.
Thanks for coming on our show. You have a book, Peak Performance, and you're the founder and CEO of Peripheral Thinkers. Let's start with the name. Why Peripheral Thinkers? What does that mean?
It's a bit of a longer story, but in essence, right now, wherever you are, whether you're watching and listening, please take this as a fact that you can access everything that you need to achieve anything that you can imagine when you know where and how to look.
You said at age 40, a diagnosis changed everything. Could you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. Growing up, I was labeled in school as dumb, low, slow, lazy, a daydreamer, outsider. That followed me into at university. It even followed me into corporate life. Had my first business and sold it in my late 20s, and climbed the corporate ladder to Fortune 500 companies. By 39, I generated 1.5 or $1.3 billion in new annual revenue for clients and companies. But I was still, even as an executive, I was an outsider. I was this person who didn't fit a mold. At 40, the diagnosis came through and I started digging into it. And I found that people with similar diagnosis had created incredible careers, had raised the bar for their profession, created even industries. People like Henry Ford, Da Vinci, Agatha Christie, JFK, Aaron Brockovich, Richard Branson, Barbara Corcoran, Muhammad Ali, Kobe Bryant, list goes on. All innovators, all dyslexic. About 10 to 15% of the population is born with dyslexia, but 20 to 30% of entrepreneurs and nearly 40% of self made millionaires are dyslexic. And you may not know this, but NASA actively recruits people with dyslexia. About 50% of NASA is dyslexic. Long story short, that diagnosis was the genesis of peripheral thinking. 2 decades later, 31 industries, 27 countries, $2.5 billion in net new revenue, and 23,000 people I've shared peripheral thinking on the way to getting to 100,000 by the end of 25 and a million by 2023. Period. End of my soapbox.
Amazing results. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Before we get into that, what are some of the challenges for dyslexic people in the like majority kind of environment? What makes them outsiders?
First of all, it's pretty well known that dyslexia does affect one's ability to read, write, and there's different forms of dyslexia and dysgraphia and dyspraxia and ADHD. We don't need to get into that, but what makes it challenging is that most institutions, whether they're entrepreneurial ventures, startups, large corporations, governments, they have guidelines, set of rules, right? There's conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom defines what those best practices are. But the definition of those is often defined by the industry's leaders and subject matter experts. So if those subject matter experts don't have a broad set of experiences that they can't see in the periphery, then their advice and their guidance is from a narrow perspective. Narrow perspectives force conformity, and conformity leads to commonplace, worse, mediocrity, and at its very worst, irrelevance. So the challenge for people with dyslexia in the workplace is they see more than what most people do. They see patterns, they see a way forward that may be non-conforming to this particular industry or this company, but is spot on, probably innovative without being um, disruptive. It could be simply applied like nitrous on an automotive engine. Immediately, you've got horsepower.
It's been a surprise to me to realize that reality is subjective and there's many different perspectives, many models that we're running each of us. And the way that you describe dyslexic people it sounds, I don't know if this is an apt analogy or not, it sounds almost like the old radios where you'd have to tune into the stations. And rather than choose like one station, it's kind of like you're in between and you can hear like elements of different stations at the same time. So you're not like choosing one reality, you're kind of getting information of kind of behind the veil that actually there's a lot of information out there. Like you say, you can do it. It's just you're kind of perhaps in this one track, kind of focused mindset here that doesn't allow you to do what you need to do. Whereas perhaps someone that thinks a little bit outside the box or outside that channel, they can see the information. How does that land for you?
Yeah, that's a terrific analogy, and I may borrow it. I've not heard that one, but that's a really good point where you're tuning between the dials and you're hearing a lot of things. People with dyslexia tend to see things that most people miss. Medically, it's been proven that our peripheral vision is actually broader and sharper than neurotypical individuals. Why is that important? It's just a nice medical touch point. But what I do know is because we see more, and what we see and hear always reminds us of something else. So our brain continues to store experiences, knowledge. We can synthesize that into principles, and I can apply. I do this with my keynote speaking. Stand in front of an audience of a couple thousand people, and they all walk out with a card that has some information on it from a childhood experience. Well, I was doing this with a large international tech company a couple of months ago. At the break, four of them got together, didn't even know each other, and they were just sharing their little cards. Got a call from the event planner 2 weeks later. Those four came up with a new strategy for a client acquisition, and they pitched it and they closed $15 million piece of business in 2 weeks, just because they just looked a hair to the left or to the right, and they took each other's ideas and started to interpret those, put them together. What was outside, literally from their youth, maybe 4 or 5 years old memory, the principles applied uniquely to that challenge and had immediate success.
Amazing.
An outsider now is not only an insider but a thought leader.
Yeah. Could you talk about how I don't know if neurotypical is the right term to use, but someone who's not dyslexic, how can they adopt this mindset? How do you help them use this to their advantage?
So there are approximately 19 skills, give or take, depending on the research, that are found innately within dyslexic innovators, and I've translated each of those skills to neurotypical for neurotypical leaders so that they can learn and apply them. Some of them are lessons, some of them are exercises. Each of them starts out kind of at a basic level, and as their skill improves in that area, then it naturally starts to grow. The skill that I teach probably most often is called interpreting. And interpreting takes seemingly unrelated ideas from the periphery and reassembles them in unique ways to address a challenge. But it requires that you go into the periphery, which doesn't mean you got to fly to Fiji or something. It's just being more aware.
Could you give us an example of what one of those exercises might look like?
Yeah, if you're open to it, we'll do this the 4 minute one. Is that
Let's
okay?
do it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So um, if you're listening to this, there's only two rules to this exercise. We're going to go on an unconventional journey, and I need you to pack your imagination and follow my lead. That's it. Just have some imagination and follow my lead. Okay. So now imagine that you're standing in a large mountain field, okay, covered with wildflowers. It's early summer. The sun feels warm on your face. The air, it's crisp and it's cool. And as you look out on this huge mountain field, bam, right in front of you is the biggest challenge you've ever faced. And it's rising like this rock, this monolith out of the flowers. Okay. So take a hand and place it in front of your face so that you can't see right in front of you. Okay. So this is if you're watching and you're just looking at the screen, this is where you follow my lead. Put your hand in front of your face. Good. So you can't see what's right in front of you. But what can you see? Well, you can move your eyes up, down, left, right. In fact, move them around and find one thing that you've not noticed before. mark on a ceiling, shadow on a wall, spot of dust on your desk, whatever it is. Just find one thing. You got it? David, you got one? David, do you
I
have?
do this a lot, so, I mean, I look around a lot here, so I don't know if I've seeing something I haven't seen before,
Yeah.
but I could pick something maybe far out of my usual vision.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you've got something. Okay.
Yeah,
So you can take your hand down.
okay.
So what you noticed with your hand in front of you is in the periphery. That's peripheral vision, right? You may not know all the details of it, but you got it. Okay, so for me, there's a unique shadow coming through my window here in my office. Okay, I'm looking at it now. It's more defined because I'm looking at it. That's peripheral awareness. And we are looking at it. So I'm looking at that big monolithic challenge in that mountain field. So what if I went, say, 100 yards theoretically to the right from my original position? Okay, so I'm 100 yards to the right. What does this new vantage point uncover about that obstacle? Well, likely you get some more depth and detail and some shadowing, and I can continue that journey all the way around that obstacle in a circle. Right? I can take my team with me on that. A 360-degree review, very common, right? But the challenge is you're still looking at that obstacle from your perspective, perhaps filtered through your team's set of experiences. So this time, some 100 yards to the right of our original starting point, instead of looking at your challenge, this time, look around. Now, what can you see? Well, other objects, maybe different terrain and other people. But these people, they're not part of your company, your team, your organization. They're not even part of your industry or your network. And they're not looking at your challenge. They've got their own challenges, their own goals. They've got their own way of processing challenges, of working through and achieving goals. Their experiences may be just what you need to see your challenge from a different perspective, using a new resource. That journey in the mountain field is generally peripheral thinking. Specifically, interpreting is a skill that we learned in the mountain field. When you take someone else's perspectives and their way of addressing, overcoming, achieving, whatever that is, and break those down into principles and then combine those with other perspectives from other people in that mountain field. Now you've got something unique. You have something relevant, tangible that can be used immediately or saved for another time, combined with other things immediately or at another time. That's that's the basis of interpreting, the interpreting skill.
I like that a lot. A couple of analogies come to mind. One is the destination. So when you notice something out of your periphery, you go to it, you like circumambulate it, like, metaphorically, if not literally. And you have this realization that actually where you came from was one of many options. We have a tendency, I think, to think that like this is the center of the universe, this is the one thing, and everything is a deviation from this. Well, what if where you're living is a deviation from the outcome that you desire? And by going out, you can then look back upon where you came from objectively instead of subjectively. And also, what came to mind is as you go to this new destination, it's almost like visiting a new star system. So all of a sudden, once you're there, you can see yet another star system that you couldn't have seen when you were in your original star system.
Yes, exactly. And that's the difference between linear thinking, lateral thinking, and peripheral thinking. Lateral thinking is that 100 yards to the left or the right, seeing things from different perspectives. Peripheral thinking goes beyond that to see it from other people's perspectives and take in their insights as as stepping stones to yet another experience, to another culture, country, um, socioeconomic group. It can be just being aware going around the corner to Fred's coffee shop every morning, just being aware of anything that's different or new and asking yourself, why is it that way? That's it. When you start down that path, it doesn't take long.
A lot of our thinking is unconscious. Do you think this dips into the unconscious? Like subconsciously, people are picking up all the data from the environment, but consciously they're not aware of most of it. Whereas this allows them to tap into their tacit or innate knowledge more.
I do, and the more that they learn some of the skills, digging and synthesizing, investigating, a variety of other skills that are peripheral thinking, uh, their awareness just simply increases. Worked with a hospital in the Midwest in 2010. Long story short, um, can't use the name, Jennifer Johnson, who was the director of patient engagement, and I had a conversation on a Sunday evening, and she called me from Hawaii, and that's what triggered texting being used by healthcare providers and patients. In 2010, it wasn't being used. She had an experience from the hotel she was at, and ta-da! Now we see that everywhere. But it was already there, and she had just learned the interpreting skill. In fact, she was on vacation and was full in mode, just checked into the hotel when the subconscious went, wait a minute, this is the feeling that you want your patients to have. Got a text from the hotel manager saying, thanks for choosing this, glad you're here, if I can make it exceptional, we'll take care of you. Trigger words. And she went, those are the kinds of things I want people to know when they come to our hospital. So and it was like 45 days later, there it was. The technology was already there. It was already being proven. It's there. They just needed to apply it in her environment.
Yeah, that's great. Could you share a specific challenge you've faced in your career and how you overcame it?
Wow. As a peripheral thinker, I, I have blind spots too, just like everyone else. My first company, a sportswear company, I was 25 or 26, so I knew everything there was to know. Right, as 20, you just know everything. So I knew everything about running this business. Started it, we were successful, things were growing, got a huge order, and I didn't have enough cash to cover that order and pay everybody's salaries and live. So I checked out of I broke the lease in my apartment, my condominium, and I lived in my car for 2 months so that I could make payroll so that they could help to fulfill the order, and we got through it. Now, what I learned from that is that it's okay to ask for help. I didn't know how to raise money, didn't know how to go to a bank and say I need a loan, and here's the order from XYZ. You see what I'm going to get from it, and I need some working capital to get through this shortfall. Just another lesson learned that no matter how much you learn, there's still more to be learned, but you do what you have to do in the moment. And what came to mind was fastest way for me to get cash is to cut my own personal expenses. I just cut it down, lived in my car for 2 months, and paid all of my employees. We made it through, continued to grow, and eventually I sold it. Um, I could have just as easily gone under. It was kind of luck and my willingness to live in a hot, smelly car for 2 months to make the numbers work.
You did what you had to do.
Yeah, yeah. When you believe in the vision, walking 1,000 miles is nothing. You just keep going, and I believed in that vision enough to not give up, or yeah. But I didn't believe in myself enough to say you don't have to know everything. Ask for help. I felt like I had to know it all, or that I did know it all. Another lesson. I keep learning these lessons.
So looking back, you might have asked for help like earlier on. Is there anything else with the benefit of hindsight you could see that you might have done differently?
There's a couple of lessons from that particular experience. One is I wish more people had that kind of an experience where they had to live in their car, where they had to find out where their limits are without endangering themselves physically or emotionally. But there's something to be said about making it through a crucible and recognizing, wow, I'm stronger, smarter. I have more in me than I thought. That's one of the lessons. The other is growing, having mentors and people willing to speak into your life. Now, this is the 80s, and I don't know that there were as many coaches as we see now on on LinkedIn. Everyone's a coach, and there's like 5 bazillion of them. most of which aren't even qualified, but they are. They're coaches. But getting help, listening to shows like yours, watching people on your program, and learning from other people and asking specifically not only for help but advice and direction, and seeing how they're processing different things. That's I think that has now become commonplace, and it should be, because nobody does anything alone. Nobody achieves anything of greatness by themselves. We can see the Olympics as a great example of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's a couple of, I guess, reasons why someone might feel alone, but you're never truly alone. Like the language that you're using to communicate wasn't invented by you. The fashion that you're like, adopting wasn't invented by you. Like the world you live in is not yours. It's a group organism. And so even if you feel like isolated in some sense, you're connected in another sense. And so, yeah, I think that there's acknowledgement because I can relate to feeling the need to overperform in order to prove your worth, in order to be allowed to belong. But really, it all comes from internally mostly. Um, but the irony there is that the ego that you're trying to build up in doing that um, is already borrowing from other people. So it's like it's not really you doing it. Not to take anything away from the effort, and I think you should see what you're capable of. But it's you're. I think I might have mentioned this in our previous chat, but I see us as simultaneously a group organism and an individual organism, and it's you're never truly alone.
No, absolutely. You aren't, and just the sooner you realize that, the sooner you can tap into the group think, the group wisdoms, and recognize your own ability, your own contribution to that greater organism.
So, on that note, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs or professionals?
Okay, so it may be the same advice, but for aspiring entrepreneurs, do it. Go. Perfection is not a goal, and there will never be a perfect time to do what is tugging at your heart. Get after it, and recognize that you have access to more resources than you may know right now. Hopefully, in this short time that we've been together, you've seen that you can pull from virtually anything. I learn all day, every day. I keep little quick notes about what I'm learning, and I apply it. Now, you can do the same. So, as an entrepreneur, you're not alone, but get after it. Go now. There's no better time. There's that phrase, when's a great time to plant a shade tree? Well, 20 years ago. What's the second best time? Today. So, today's a great day. If you didn't do it 20 years ago, do it now. For professionals, it's the same thing. Please know that yes, your expertise in that profession is important. It builds credibility and the like. Your ability to connect uh, and understand other people in other industries is what will make that expertise super powerful, not just effective, but super powerful. I asked this question in my keynotes: conventional wisdom versus peripheral thinking. So, what does a baker in Bulgaria have in common with a steel mill in Spain? What does a movie theater in Malaysia have in common with a distribution center in Denmark? Not much. What does a flu in China have to do with unemployment around the world? Conventional wisdom in 2019 still said not much. Peripheral thinking was already saying they got a lot in common. In fact, there's lessons I can learn from this. Never stop learning, never stop exploring, never stop seeking new insights. That is what will continue to propel your profession until you choose to no longer do that profession.
Being an outsider, when I was a tour guide in Japan, I led small group tours for a couple weeks at a time, and my clients were CEOs of other companies around the world, usually different industries. And all I saw was similarities because I was an outsider. I wasn't in their industries, and all they saw was the differences because they're very much tied to their industries. And it was really interesting over those couple of weeks when you have like conversations over dinner or train rides or whatever, where they started to see like, oh wow, I had no idea that I had this in common with this person, and they get excited, and then it's like unlocking this door. Like all of a sudden now you can take vacations on the moon, for example. It's like, wow, I never knew that was possible. And that to me was infectious. And after the pandemic, when I went to business school, leaned into entrepreneurship, I leaned into that pattern recognition of like globally and cross industry, noticing these patterns and connections and introducing people between different regions or industries. And they're like, how did you think of this like partnership? I never would have thought of that. And it's like sometimes by having that outside perspective, you have these unique insights, as I said. So yeah, I definitely relate to that, and I think it's really nice how nature kind of balances itself out.
Yeah, exactly. But it needs a little push by Mother Nature or by David to make those connections for people. Once it happens, just like with peripheral thinking, I see light bulbs go on. Once it happens, it's infectious. And people start to realize, wow, I really do want to know that the story from my server. I want to know the what's going on with the barista. How did they come up with that? And
Right.
that stuff feeds. Don't let curiosity ever stop because
Yeah.
the connections are global. And the more that we all globally recognize that, the quicker we can work together across industries to solve really, really big issues.
Yeah, yeah, I forgot your examples you listed, but something like an industrial parts manufacturer and a baker, like what do they have in common in different regions? And I'm like, I bet they have a lot in common. Like for example, they might have some recurring customers, or maybe they're trying to grow their business in some way, or maybe they have like a certain process that they're using. And yeah, the goods are different, maybe the machines are different, but there's a lot. Once you go to, there's like almost infinite layers to any day. And so if you look at that and you can take, you mentioned in the 4-minute exercise we did, that kind of peripheral, like notice this periphery, walk around it and see what's different about that, and adopt that kind of perspective into your problem solving. So the baker might have a unique process that the industrial parts manufacturer can implement, or vice versa.
That's it. That's exactly right. So maybe the question, instead of what do they have in common, is what can they learn from each other?
Yeah. So what is the impact or change you hope to bring to your industry or community?
I truly want people to embrace the fact that it is fact. You can access right now everything you need to achieve anything that you can imagine. Anything. It's a bold statement and it flies in the face of conventional wisdom. That collaboration, right now, the elements that we need to solve any problem are already exist at their basic level. They already exist. We just need to bring them together. When we can do that, I think we live in a better place.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. There's change is constant and disruption is coming, whether you're ready for it or not. So you might as well lean into it and just disrupt your own life day to day in some way, just so you're kind of preparing
Exactly.
and developing these habits. You
Exactly.
mentioned, go ahead. Sorry.
You can't, you're exactly right. You can either adapt to the changes that are coming at you from your environment, which many people have built these adaptive, um, uh, flexible companies, or you can make the change in yourself and to your environment, thereby being the change, not adapting to the change.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. And that might be some kind of hack, because I think it's almost like it's a given in nature that change is coming. So if you're that change, nature can tick that box and be like, okay, change has been introduced. We can leave it alone for now. Half kidding, but I think that you're already kind of in that mindset. So there's more fluidity. Whereas if you're like fixed, like, oh, I sure hope things don't change because I really like the way things are. You're kind of operating in a suboptimal mindset, because any deviation from where you are is loss, and you have an aversion to that. So you're not thinking proactively or productively, I think, as much.
100%. Yep, you nailed it.
You mentioned earlier, something you mentioned earlier reminded me of labels and how they can be useful for like cardinal directions on a map. Like sometimes it's useful to know which way is north, but if you just keep going north, eventually you'll be going south. So it's good to, I think, let go when it's like understand this probably takes a lifetime, but try to get better at finding that balance for using a label when it's useful and letting go of it when it's no longer useful, because it's a trade-off. And when you choose a label, you're basically excluding everything else. So it's like David is a fill in the blank. That means David is not a every other blank. And so now you're not just limiting me, you're actually limiting yourself, because you mentioned earlier like you're not good at math, and I was like you could network for that. Well, if you're not like open up to the fact that like someone could be good at algebra but not good at trigonometry, and you're just like they're not good at math full stop, you might be preventing yourself from like rapid growth.
100%. Right. And I think the poster child for dyslexia is perhaps the greatest mathematician of all time, Einstein. Right? So um, that's a great point. There's a friend of mine, a keynote speaker and a near futurist, Neil Redding, who talks about what it's like that we are born and we're inculcated into this society where everything has a name, has a label: dog, cat, bull, kitty, sky, etc. And yet we don't teach the connection between all of those. They're distinct individual entities. That's not the case. There's nothing that's distinct, stands on its own, and doesn't touch anything else. There's nothing. Everything touches.
There's I forget the lady's name. There's some like researcher who I don't know if she's a biologist or a doctor or something, and she has this statement that's pretty profound. I mean, backed up by science, but she said like we're essentially like 90% like bacteria and like different things like our bodies. So there's only like maybe 10% of us that would be like human. And kind of like what I mentioned before about like language, and there's so many things we take for granted that we've already adopted from our environment. You know, we rely on gravity and atmospheric pressure and this and that, but we're part of so much that we take for granted that we don't see, and we're just like, oh, I'm David, like, you know, this is all mine. And it's like, no, you're borrowing and you're like existing in this very elaborate system.
Yeah, and you can apply that same thing to uh, the entrepreneurial venture. For the listener, for to the company that you've started, to the company that you're running, company you're part of, it's the same thing. Everyone is contributing. Everyone is part of that, and the more of you that everyone brings, the more access to resources and perspectives that organization has, and the more influence that organization can have on the environment around it, which is not separate than from the business. It is all connected. I think we're saying the same thing, only you say it much quicker and more eloquently.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot coming from you. Um, but yeah, is there anything that you wanted to leave us with that we didn't get to touch on in our conversation so far?
I've enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that the audience has found something useful today. If you've got a question, you can reach David, you can reach me, but just know that all the elements you need exist. I had a conversation recently with a young lady who'd lost her job. She's in Pakistan, and she was asking me for $40,000 to start this business. And I said, I appreciate that. I'm not going to give you $40,000, but I'll give you this, which is that you can access everything. But I don't have anything. You have a family. Well, yeah, I have, this and this. Right. And they know people. Right. Okay. And you've got dirt right in front of you, because I see in the picture that you're sitting on some dirt. Okay. So what can you do with dirt in a family? Can you farm? Can you do right? So get out of the idea that I have to have a brick and mortar, or that I have to have a job, or I have to have a title, or what. You have access. It's simply here that is limiting you from seeing there. So go there, because what you need is there, then bring it in.
Well, thanks once again. You really opened my eyes, and hopefully our audience as well, ears and eyes. Where can people follow you? Where would you like to direct us?
Sure. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Paul Daniels Jr., Paul Daniels Jr. You can also find me on my website, which is also www.pauldanielsjr.com. Those are two great places. And my website, there's a contact page. If you're interested in somebody that has a unique keynote, hopefully you recognize that this is a little bit different than things that you've heard in the past. Love to talk with you about that. And if we can make it happen, I'm great to speak with your organization. And if you're a company that needs some challenges overcome, I can show you how to fish, teach you how to fish, and see if we can't generate $15 million for you in 2 weeks' time. Yep.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again, Paul. It was a
My
pleasure.
pleasure. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks very much. I appreciate you.